On May 1st, Aragorn was crowned king. Let us commemorate that event and honor Professor Tolkien raising funds to get books into the hands of needy children. Join us to read The Return of the King and help all children have books in their homes.
All right, we are live again. We're back as we are the last three chapters. I'm very, very pleased to introduce Anna and Justin Grunberg, who have
Hello.
been Homeward Bound, the 7th chapter of Book 2 of Return of the King. And thank you both for doing this. And by the way, those wonderful posters and visuals you saw on all the pages are compliments of Justin. So thank you. These are people of many, many, many talents and great generosity helping us tonight. So with that, I'll stop talking and y'all can take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Chapter 7, Homeward Bound. At last the hobbits had their faces turned toward home. They were eager now to see the Shire again, but at first they rode only slowly, for Frodo had been ill at ease. When they came to the ford of Brunnen, he had halted and seemed loth to ride into the stream, and they noted that for a while his eyes appeared not to see them or things about him. All that day he was silent. It was the 6th of October. "Are you in pain, Frodo?" said Gandalf quietly as he rode by Frodo's side. "Well, yes, I am," said Frodo. "It is my shoulder. The wound aches, and the memory of darkness is heavy on me. It was a year ago today." "Alas, there are some wounds that cannot be wholly cured," said Gandalf. "I fear it may be so with mine," said Frodo. "There is no real going back. Though I may come to the Shire, it will not seem the same, for I shall not be the same. I am wounded with knife, sting and tooth, and a long burden. Where shall I find rest?" Gandalf did not answer. By the end of the next day, the pain and unease had passed, and Frodo was merry again, as merry as if he did not remember the blackness of the day before. After that, the journey went well, and the days went quickly by, for they rode at leisure, and often they lingered in the fair woodlands where the leaves were red and yellow in the autumn sun. At length they came to Weathertop, and it was then drawing towards evening, and the shadow of the hill lay dark on the road. Then Frodo begged them to hasten, and he would not look towards the hill, but rode through its shadow with head bowed and cloak drawn close about him. That night the weather changed, and a wind came from the west laden with rain, and it blew loud and chill, and the yellow leaves whirled like birds in the air. When they came to the Chetwood, already the boughs were almost bare, and a great curtain of rain veiled Bree Hill from their sight. So it was that near the end of a wild and wet evening in the last days of October, the 5 travelers rode up the climbing road and came to the south gate of Bree. It was locked fast, and the rain blew in their faces, and in the darkening sky low clouds went hurrying by, and their hearts sank a little, for they had expected more welcome. When they had called many times, at last the gatekeeper came out, and they saw that he carried a great cudgel. He looked at them with fear and suspicion, but when he saw that Gandalf was there and that his companions were hobbits, in spite of their strange gear, then he brightened and wished them welcome. "Come in," he said, unlocking the gate. "We won't stay for news out here in the cold and the wet, a ruffianly evening, but old Barley will no doubt give you a welcome at the Pony. And there you'll hear all there is to hear. And there you'll hear later all that we say and more," laughed Gandalf. "How is Harry?" The gatekeeper scowled. "Gone," he said. "But you'd best ask Barleyman. Good evening." "Good evening to you," they said, and passed through, and then they noticed that behind the hedge at the roadside, a long, low hut had been built, and a number of men had come out and were staring at them over the fence. When they came to Bill Ferny's house, they saw that the hedge there was tattered and unkempt, and the windows were all boarded up. "Do you think you killed him with that apple, Sam?" said Pippin. "I'm not so hopeful, Mr. Pippin," said Sam, "but I'd like to know what became of that poor pony. He's been on my mind many a time, and the wolves howling and all." At last they came to the prancing pony, and that at least looked outwardly unchanged, and there were lights behind the red curtains in the lower windows. They rang the bell, and Nob came to the door and opened it a crack and peeped through. And when he saw them standing under the lamp, he gave a cry of surprise. "Oh, Mr. Butterbur, master," he shouted, "they've come back." "Oh, have they? I'll learn them," came Butterbur's voice, and out he came with a rush, and he had a club in his hand. But when he saw who they were, he stopped short, and the black scowl on his face changed to wonder and delight. "Nob, you woolly-pated ninny," he cried. "Can't you give old friends their names? You shouldn't go scaring me like that with times as they are. Well, well, and where have you come from? I never expected to see any of you folk again, and that's a fact. Going off into the wild with that Strider and all those black men about. Well, I'm right glad to see you, and none more than Gandalf. Come in, the same rooms as before. They're free. Indeed, most rooms are empty these days, as I'll not hide from you, for you'll find it out soon enough. And I'll see what can be done about supper as soon as may be, but I'm short-handed at present. Hey, Nob, you slow coach, tell Bob. Ah, but there, I'm forgetting, Bob's gone. Goes home to his folk at nightfall now. Well, take the guest ponies to the stables, Nob, and you'll be taking your horse to his stable yourself, Gandalf, I don't doubt. A fine beast, as I said when I first set eyes on him. Well, come in, make yourselves at home." Mr. Butterbur had at any rate not changed his manner of talking, and still seemed to live in his old breathless bustle. And yet there was hardly anybody about, and all was quiet. From the common room there came a low murmur of no more than 2 or 3 voices, and seen closer in the light of 2 candles that he lit and carried before them, the landlord's face looked rather wrinkled and careworn. He led them down the passage to the parlor that they had used on that strange night more than a year ago, and they followed him, a little disquieted, for it seemed plain to them that old Barleyman was putting a brave face on some trouble. Things were not what they had been, but they said nothing and waited. As they expected, Mr. Butterbur came to the parlor after supper to see if all had been to their liking. As indeed it had. No change for the worse had yet come upon the beer or the victuals at the pony at any rate. "Now I won't make so bold as to suggest you should come to the common room tonight," said Butterbur. "You'll be tired, and there isn't many folk there this evening anyway. But if you could spare me half an hour before you go to your beds, I would dearly like to have some talk with you, quiet-like, by ourselves." "That is just what we should like too," said Gandalf. "We are not tired. We have been taking things easy. We were wet, cold, and hungry, but all that you have cured. Come, sit down, and if you have any pipeweed, we'll bless you." "Well, if you'd called for anything else, I'd have been happier," said Butterbur. "That's just a thing that we're short of, seeing how we've only got what we grow ourselves, and that's not enough. There's none to be had from the Shire these days, but I'll do what I can." When he came back, he brought them enough to last them for a day or two, a wad of uncut leaf. "South Flint," she said, "and the best we have, but not the match of South Farthing, as I've always said, though I'm all for Brie in most matters, begging your pardon." They put him in a large chair by the wood fire, and Gandalf sat on the other side of the hearth, and the hobbits in low chairs between them. And then they talked for many times half an hour, and exchanged all such news as Mr. Butterbur wished to hear or give. Most of the things which they had to tell were a mere wonder and bewilderment to their host, and far beyond his vision, and they brought forth few comments other than "You don't say," often repeated in defiance of the evidence of Mr. Butterbur's own ears. "You don't say, Mr. Baggins, or is it Mr. Underhill? I'm getting so mixed up. You don't say, Master Gandalf. Well, I never. Who'd have thought it in our times?" But he did say much on his own account. Things were far from well, he would say. Business was not even fair, it was downright bad. "No one comes nigh Bree now from outside," he said. "And the inside folks, they stay at home mostly and keep their doors barred. It all comes of those newcomers and gangrels that began coming up the Greenway last year, as you may remember, but more came later. Some were just poor bodies running away from trouble, but most were bad men full of thievery and mischief. And there was trouble right here in Bree, bad trouble. Why, we had a real set to, and there were some folk killed dead, if you'll believe me." "I will indeed," said Gandalf. "How many?" "2 and 3, said Butterbur, referring to the big folk and the little. There was poor Matt Heathertoes and Rowley Appledore and little Tom Pickthorn from over the hill, and Willie Banks from up away, and one of the Underhills from Staddle, all good fellows, and the Mist. And Harry Goatleaf, that used to be on the West Gate, and that Bill Fernie, they came in on the stranger's side, and they've gone off with them, and it's my belief they let them in. On the night of the fight, I mean. And that was after we showed them the gates and pushed them out, before the year's end that was, and the fight was early in the new year after the heavy snow we had. And now they're gone for robbers and live outside, hiding in the woods beyond Archet and out in the wilds north away. It's like a bit of the bad old times tales tell of, I say. It isn't safe on the road and nobody goes far and folk lock up early. We have to keep watchers all around the fence and put a lot of men on the gates at night. Well, no one troubled us, said Pippin, and we came along slowly and kept no watch. We thought we'd left all trouble behind us. Ah, that you haven't, master, more's the pity, said Butterbur. But it's no wonder they left you alone. They wouldn't go for armed folk with swords and helmets and shields and all. Make them think twice, that would, and I must say it put me aback a bit when I saw you.